So kind of like we did in Chapter 7, where we wrapped up our section by comparing different portions from two different populations, that's what we're going to finish up with in Section 8.4. So far in this chapter, we've looked at performing a hypothesis test on a single proportion. With very few changes, this procedure can be altered to accommodate a different type of problem, comparing the two different proportions. So we're going to use the same four-step procedure: hypothesize, prepare, compute to compare, and interpret. We're just going to make some minor changes to our hypotheses. So when it comes to our hypotheses, instead of comparing P to P naught, we're comparing P1 to P2. So notice that our P's on both sides have subscripts. Again, our notation, making sure that we know which population is our first population, which one is our second population. Just make sure we stay consistent with our notation as we go through the problem. We need to check conditions for both samples. That both samples are random and independent. They're independent of one another. Observations within each sample are independent. At least 10 successes and 10 failures for both. Notice that we have a little formula here for p hat. P hat is going to be equal to, it's basically the average of our two proportions. So p hat is x1 plus x2 divided by n1 plus n2. And then we're also going to have to make sure our population is at least 10 times larger than each of our samples. There is a change in our z statistic formula as well. So notice that it is a little bit more complicated here. So it's still the same structure: our observed value minus our null value divided by our standard error. But because we have two different samples, our formula itself becomes a lot more complicated. The good news is, for the most part, you're not going to have to worry too much about calculating this because we're just going to be using Statcrunch to do our calculations and finding our z statistics for us. We need to feel comfortable finding our p hat that we saw on the previous page, but this is something that you might use in one homework problem, but we're not going to have to worry too much about the test or anything like that. Our steps at Statcrunch then are also at the bottom of this page. We're going to go to Stat, select Proportion Stats, select two samples this time with summary. Again, we're going to enter the number of successes and observations for each. Select our hypotheses, enter our hypotheses. There's a little note here: do not change the number 0 in the pair of hypotheses. Just make sure we select the correct inequality symbol. So there is just kind of one little thing there that's slightly different from when we're doing our one sample, but just kind of make a little note of this here when we're using Statcrunch. Right. So in the next couple of examples, we're going to go through our hypothesis testing process for comparing two different population proportions, and that will wrap us up for Chapter 8.